It's 6 p.m. on a Monday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's begin with the headlines. Seoul and Washington begin a 6-day naval drill to send a stern warning to North Korea. Putting an exclamation mark on that message is the presence of the Nimitz-class nuclear-powered supercarrier USS Ronald Reagan. Korea's finance minister says there can't be any further government spending, but there's room for monetary easing. His statement runs counter to that of the BOK chief. The second U.S. presidential debate has the candidates jabbing at each other's flaws but offering little to no new information for voters. Now, many experts believe North Korea might carry out another provocation today to mark a key anniversary. The reclusive state has so far remained silent, but Seoul and Washington are taking no chances, conducting a naval drill on all sides of the peninsula. Kim Hyun-bin starts us off with a joint exercise designed to enhance interoperability and warn Pyongyang against future provocations.
The United States has deployed a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, USS Ronald Reagan, to the peninsula for a joint naval exercise with South Korea. The 6-day Invincible Spirit exercise kicked off on Monday to send a warning to North Korea over its recent nuclear and missile provocations.
The Invincible Spirit exercise will run through October 15th on all of South Korea's coasts. The exercise serves as a warning to North Korea and showcases the Allies' counterstrike abilities in addition to enhancing our joint operational capabilities.
The Allies have mobilized dozens of warships and submarines for the drills, including Aegis destroyers, surveillance planes, and U.S. F-18 Hornet fighter jets. This is the first time the Allies have engaged in exercises on all coasts of the peninsula at the same time. In the East and West Seas, the Allies are conducting maritime operations to counter North Korean commandos infiltrating the maritime demarcation line. Off the southwestern coast, the Allies will conduct anti-submarine and aircraft drills, as well as precision-guided strike operations. The drills come after an increase in provocations from North Korea, including its 5th nuclear test and multiple ballistic missile launches. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
History has taught us that North Korea could celebrate its Workers' Party anniversary with nuclear tests or missile launches. So what kept them from such activities this year? According to our Connie Kim, they may have had their hands full focusing on flood relief efforts.
North Korea emphasized Kim Jong-un's one-man leadership as it marked the 71st anniversary of the founding of its ruling Workers' Party on Monday. The North's official Rodong Sinmun newspaper said in an op-ed the same day that strengthening the military is the most important task for the regime and highlighted Kim's policy of putting the people first. The paper said that as long as the regime has a military and a strong method for launching a nuclear attack on its enemies, North Korea will remain a peaceful state. There were speculations that North Korea would launch an attack to commemorate the Workers' Party anniversary, but Pyongyang has remained relatively quiet this year. Last year, the North held a massive military parade showcasing new weapons, including a modified KN-08 intercontinental missile and a new 300mm multiple rocket launcher, and Kim Jong-un gave a rare 25-minute speech emphasizing welfare for the people. The regime has a track record of launching provocations on key anniversaries, which had fueled speculation of another on the Monday anniversary. Military experts had laid out 3 possible provocations: a nuclear test, an intercontinental ballistic missile launch, or a missile launch from a mobile launch pad. But with North Korea still in conducting restoration work following the worst flooding it has seen in decades, there were also those who said that the day would pass without incident. Most North Korea watchers, however, have not ruled out the possibility of a future provocation, saying it could come sometime before the U.S. presidential election next month to increase Pyongyang's leverage with Washington. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Robert King, the U.S. Special Envoy for North Korea Human Rights, is slated to be in Seoul today. His visit comes during the visit to South Korea by the U.S. ambassador to the UN as the two allies seek to up the pressure on North Korea for its recent provocations. Lee Ji-won tells us more.
Stepping up the pressure on North Korea over its human rights record, adding to the current efforts to intensify the sanctions on the regime after its 5th nuclear test last month. Robert King, the U.S. Special Envoy for North Korean human rights issue, will be in South Korea for 4 days starting Monday. According to the U.S. Department of State, King will meet with South Korean officials to discuss expanding cooperation on the human rights issue and other regional and bilateral issues. He will also attend the Forum on Human Rights in North Korea. Washington's efforts to turn up the heat on Pyongyang were outlined by Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, who is in South Korea at the end of a 4-day visit that started Saturday. Upon her arrival, Power condemned North Korea's human rights record, saying the U.S. is seeking to shine the world spotlight on the worst crimes with really no parallel in this world. Since then, she's also had several exchanges with North Korean defectors at schools and resettlement facilities. One expert says the U.S. actions will work more quickly than the current sanctions on the regime.
South Korea and the U.S. are looking for additional sanctions to impose on North Korea, but it will take time for those sanctions to have an impact. But by highlighting North Korea's weaknesses to the world, mainly politics, freedom and human rights issues, the two countries are showing the North that there are and will be more consequences for its nuclear tests.
He adds the pressure on the regime over its human rights record is a measure similar to the kinds of provocations the regime launches when it tests weapons, because there's very little either side can do to counter the actions of the other. 이지원, Arirang News.
Business leaders from Korea and Japan gathered in Seoul for an annual meeting this morning to further boost economic cooperation. The Federation of Korean Industries and the Japan Business Federation vowed greater cooperation to beef up trade and youth exchanges and to jointly enter third countries. Meeting the delegations at Cheongwade later in the afternoon, President Park Geun-hye called for collaboration in new industries like hydrogen fuel cell cars and asked for greater support on denuclearizing North Korea, as peace on the Korean peninsula would offer greater business opportunities to both Korea and Japan. The Japanese business leaders expressed appreciation for the mutually beneficial bilateral ties and expressed hope that President Park would attend the Korea-Japan-China Business Summit being arranged for later this year, should it take place in Japan. South Korea's finance minister says there's no room for further government spending, but that a rate cut could help spur growth. On the other hand, the BOK governor seems to think the very opposite. Shin Se-min delves deeper into the two very contrasting views on how to improve the Korean economy.
There's not much room left for additional fiscal measures. These were words from Korea's top economic policymaker before reporters in Washington, where he's attending conferences hosted by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Finance Minister Yoo Il-ho said there will not be any further government spending plans unless variables immediately come into play. He added that the government has already laid out expansionary fiscal policies by drawing up a supplementary budget, expanding next year's fiscal spending, and committing an extra $9 billion by year's end. But when it comes to monetary policy, the minister suggested he has quite a different outlook. In an earlier statement, he said although low key rates have led to a rise in household debt, the current amount is still manageable, hinting there's more room for easing. But it appears this sentiment is not quite shared with Korea's top central banker. BOK Governor Lee Ju-yeol, who's also attending the same economic gatherings, said that while there's still room for additional rate cuts, monetary policy alone cannot prop up the economy. He also said there's more room to expand fiscal policies as Korea is in the top tiers when it comes to fiscal soundness. Korea's central bank will make its monthly rate announcement this Thursday at a time when a potential U.S. rate hike is adding more pressure for further rate adjustments. The current rate stands at an all-time low of 1.25%, but there are still great concerns that more easing would exacerbate the household debt load that stands at over $1.1 trillion as of the end of June. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korea's ruling Saenuri Party and top government officials have been working on plans to help people affected by last week's typhoon that struck southern parts of the country. Our Kim Young-gil walks us through the newly announced measures.
The ruling Saenuri Party and the government held talks on Monday aimed at providing aid to people living in the typhoon-stricken areas in the southern part of the country.
The Ministry of Public Safety and Security has provided $7.2 million in immediate support. We will also negotiate with the finance ministry to provide compensation for individual property.
The government says it's planning to provide support for 70% of all damage to individual properties incurred as a result of the deadly typhoon. People in the affected areas will be able to have flood-damaged vehicles fixed free of charge, and they will be eligible for other benefits, including lower water and gas utility bills. Schools in typhoon-hit areas will be provided with financial aid. The ruling party also urged the government to designate typhoon-stricken areas as special disaster zones, which would make them eligible for relief aid. Some 10,000 volunteers, soldiers, and government officials are lending a helping hand to speed up the recovery process in the cities of Ulsan, Gyeongju, Busan, and Jeju.
I would like to thank all our citizens for always coming together to help overcome the hardships. I believe this is our people's strength.
Last week, Typhoon Chaba struck southern parts of Korea, leaving at least 7 people dead. Aside from the human losses, the heavy rain affected thousands of hectares of farmland and inundated more than 500 houses and thousands of automobiles. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Over in the United States, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump held their second presidential debate on Sunday. It was combative and contentious, and those are some of the least harsh criticisms of the event. Yoon-shin has the details.
It is being described as the nastiest debate in U.S. presidential history. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump hurled insults at each other Sunday night in a town hall debate that followed another week of revelations about both candidates. The tension in the room was apparent from the moment the candidates walked out on stage, when neither one bothered to reach out to shake the other's hand. The night started with a question about the recently released 2005 recording of Trump, in which he is heard bragging about groping and trying to have sex with women. Trump apologized but said that it was nothing more than, quote, locker room talk. Then somehow he moved on to make several references to ISIS and later brought up the sexual allegations against former President Bill Clinton from nearly 2 decades ago. Clinton criticized Trump's language and behavior, especially towards women, and questioned his fitness for the office of president. Further in, Trump brought up Clinton's email and said that he would appoint a special prosecutor to investigate her, saying she would be in jail if he were president. In response, Clinton admitted that her use of a private email server was a mistake, but said the justice system had done its job with regard to the matter. Foreign policy, healthcare, and national security were among the other critical topics raised, but the debate isn't expected to move the needle much for either candidate. There is one last presidential debate scheduled for October 19th, when the American people will get one last chance to see the candidates before the election. Yoon-shin, Arirang News.
Major news outlets are voicing their discontent after the Norwegian Nobel Committee awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos. Kim Jong-soo looks deeper into this story.
Last Friday, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos was named this year's Nobel Peace Prize laureate, for which he will be given a prize of almost $1 million. He's already pledged to give that money to the victims of the country's half-century-long civil war, and as well he might, according to some in the media. They say he doesn't deserve the prize. Santos was recognized by the Nobel Committee for signing a peace treaty with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC. Many expected the treaty to end the civil war, which has claimed the lives of more than 220,000 people, but the deal was rejected by voters in a referendum, just days before the Peace Prize was announced. With the treaty now in tatters, last Friday, the Wall Street Journal criticized the Nobel Committee's decision as, quote, strange, claiming it rewarded a good intention rather than actual peace. Instead of President Santos, the newspaper argued former Colombian President Alvaro Uribe deserves the prize instead, because his militant campaigns against FARC and his free market reforms actually made life safer for, quote, millions of Colombians. And on Monday, it further criticized the committee's decision by pointing out that while the treaty appears to have been voted down by the closest of margins, 50.2% to 49.8%, over 83% of the Colombian electorate had either abstained or voted against the deal, which would have granted amnesty to war criminals as well as congressional seats for the FARC guerrillas. The Economist magazine joined in on the criticism, describing the Peace Prize as premature and arguing it could inflame opinion against Santos as a leader more interested in listening to foreign leaders than his people. The Guardian, meanwhile, included Santos's win in its so-called Kissinger Index, which keeps track of undeserving Nobel Peace Prize nominations. Kim Jung-soo, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now, the death toll in Haiti in the wake of Hurricane Matthew has risen to above 1,000, and authorities are burying bodies in mass graves to prevent a cholera outbreak. The Category 4 storm has displaced over 60,000 people, destroyed more than 1,000 houses, and swept away crops. The country announced 3 days of mourning for the dead on Sunday. The U.S., France, and international organizations are sending emergency aid to meet the immediate needs of those affected. Over in the U.S., Hurricane Matthew has claimed 16 lives, nearly half in North Carolina, flooding cities and knocking out power in millions of buildings. The hurricane is the most powerful Atlantic storm to hit the region since 2007. Meteorologists downgraded it to a post-tropical cyclone early on Sunday. And that's all for our viewers around the world. If you're tuned in from Korea, stay with us for more stories making headlines in the nation. Thank you for watching.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm Devin Whiting with your in-depth domestic news. The government has condemned a strike by the truckers' union that began this morning, saying it's illegal and warning of consequences. Although there's been minimal disturbance to distribution networks so far, combined with the ongoing strikes on the railways, it could eventually cost the economy quite a bit. Kwon Jang-ho has this report.
A union of cargo truck drivers began their strike at midnight Monday morning. Some 7,000 took part in the mass walkout in protest against the government's plans to modernize the shipping industry. But participation was lower than expected. Container deliveries were reduced by less than a third. Still, the government responded sternly, deploying an emergency fleet of over 100 military trucks, and warned those taking part in the strike that they risk losing benefits, such as their license and 6 months' worth of government fuel subsidies.
Those who obstruct, set fire, or attack other cargo trucks will be tracked down, arrested, and have their trucking license taken away. We will respond in accordance with the law, swiftly and strictly.
This strike comes as the rail and subway union walkout entered its third week as well. Currently, over 40% of rail and subway workers are taking part in that strike, which has cut rail freight deliveries in half. Most of that slack had been picked up by cargo trucks on the roads over the last 2 weeks. But it's the first time rail and truck strikes have happened at the same time, and with Korea's shipping industry also facing a crisis, there are fears that if the strike goes on for too long, it could take a big toll on the country's domestic and international trade volumes. The last time a significant truckers' strike took place was in 2008. Over 70% of unionized truck drivers walked out for 7 days, leading to over $7 billion worth of damage to Korea's economy. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
The government's announced changes to a law that has until now prevented Koreans from listing a foreign spouse or child as family members on their resident registration cards. Under the current system, a spouse or child with foreign nationality does not appear on a Korean national's registration, and on paper, the Korean would appear to be raising the child alone. After a revision announced by the Ministry of the Interior, foreign family members will appear on the cards, not as residents or citizens, but as foreigners. A special trip to a government office will not be required. Local district immigration bureaus will make the changes after confirming existing family arrangements. New data show nearly half of all adult Korean men are overweight, as is 1 in 4 Korean women. That's according to the National Health Insurance Service and the Korean Society for the Study of Obesity. They found that as of last year, 40.7% of men were overweight and 24.5% of women were, and the figure's been rising. As for obesity, the rate for both sexes has risen to 4.8%, almost half again as much as it was in 2009. It's become an issue of national concern, especially with a rise in obesity-linked diseases like diabetes. Studies have found obesity raises the mortality rate of all deadly conditions by 20%. And those are some of the stories we're following right now. Thanks for watching. We'll be back at 8 p.m. Korea time. Bye for now.